Hey everyone, and welcome to a new tutorial. And in this tutorial, we'll be learning how to build out this mini students management system using Laravel, Inertia.js, and Vue 3. And the reason for creating this section is I wanted to let you know how to build out CRUD-based applications using the Inertia.js and the Laravel stack. So as you can see, we are displaying the students' data over here. And as expected, we can create a new record by clicking on this button. So let's go ahead and click on it. And as you can see, we can add the student's details like the name, the email address, along with the class dropdown. And we also have a section dropdown. So as you can see, initially, the sections data is not loaded, but as soon as I go ahead and select any of these classes, then as you can see, the section data is populated accordingly based on the selected class. So yeah, we'll be looking at how we can implement dependent dropdowns in Inertia.js, and we'll be using Axios to do this because it is technically not possible using Inertia.js. So yeah, we'll be looking at how we can implement dependent dropdowns, and we'll also look at how we can retain this data on the edit page. So if I go ahead and click on this edit button of the first record, then as you can see, we'll look at how we can retain this data on the edit page along with these dependent dropdowns. As you can see, both of these records are retained. Okay, let's further look into it. So we'll also look at how we can delete these records, and later at the end of this section, we will be implementing paginations, and these are going to be server-side paginations, and we won't be using any third-party packages to implement this. So if I go ahead and click on these links, then as you can see, without any page refreshes, the data is loaded from the backend. So yeah, we'll be looking at that, and along the way, we will also look at how we can search for these records from our database. So let's say if I search for GA, then as you can see, 5 results are returned from the database. And I also want to show you one more thing in here. So let's say if I search for G, then as you can see, 64 results are returned for this term. And now I can go ahead and navigate between different pages for this specific search term. And you might have noticed one more thing, that is this search term is preserved in the URL. So if I go ahead and now reload, then as you can see, this search term is automatically applied from the URL. So yeah, we'll be looking at that, and now I can navigate between these pages, as you can see, and the search term that is filled over here is retained even though I am navigating between these pages. So yeah, we'll be looking at that, and this can be a bit tricky to implement, but we will tackle those and finally implement this whole flow in this section. And finally, we will also look at how we can implement filtering the data by classes, as you can see. So if I go ahead and click on class 1, then as you can see, only the results where the class ID is 1 is returned. So yeah, we'll be looking at this whole flow in this section, and I believe that you'll learn some new stuff along the way. So yeah, that's it for this video, and in the next part, we will go ahead and set up the models and the migrations necessary for building out this project. So yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one. Okay, so the first step is to set up our project, and we'll be using the Laravel installer to install a fresh Laravel project. And as you can see in here, I'm using a terminal called Warp, and it is only available for Mac. So yeah, I can't really do anything about that, but I think it's available for Linux. So yeah, you can go ahead and check out their official website on warp.dev. And again, I'm going to use the Laravel installer to install a new Laravel project. And since we are building out a students management system using Inertia.js and Vue, so I'm going to name this as Inertia Vue Students Management. Let's go ahead and hit enter. And we'll be using the Laravel Breeze starter kit. And along with that, we'll use the Inertia Vue Stack to get started. So yeah, let's go ahead and choose that, and we'll be using the Vue with Inertia stack. Let's choose that, and we don't need the dark mode support. We don't also need Inertia SSR support because we are just going to learn new things and we won't be deploying this to production. So yeah, that's the reason I'm not going to choose the Inertia SSR. And I don't work with TypeScript as well. So yeah, I'm not going to choose that. So yeah, without choosing any options, let's go ahead and hit enter. And for the testing framework, we'll be using Pest, even though we won't be writing any test in this project, but still I'll choose Pest. And yeah, I want to initialize a Git repository. So yeah, let's choose that. And while this is installing, let's also talk about some database setup. So we'll be using the SQLite as our database. So let's go ahead and choose that, because yeah, we don't have to deal with defining a separate database on MySQL end. This will all be managed in a single SQLite file. So yeah, I'm going to choose that. And yeah, let's go ahead and finalize this flow. Okay, so the project has been installed. Let's open that in our code editor. I'll just cd into that project and I'll open that in my VS Code. And yeah, let's also go ahead and run the migrations. So I'll just run PAM, which stands for PHP Artisan Migrate. And yeah, we don't have the database.sqlite file, so this is going to create that along the way. So I'll just choose yes, and this is going to migrate the files. And yeah, let's go ahead and open that in our browser. I'll just reload, and this is the project. Let me go ahead and toggle the developer mode, because yeah, this will let us view the URL that we are currently serving. And again, I'm using Laravel herd to serve my site. So yeah, let's go ahead and register a new user. I'm gonna name this as admin. The email is gonna be admin@admin.com. The password is gonna be password. And yeah, this is the project. And in the next part, we'll be looking at setting up the models, migrations, factories, and seeders for our project. So yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one. Okay, so in this video, we'll be setting up the models, the migrations, the factories, and the seeders for our project. And yeah, before working on that, I also want to show you the database structure of our project, because once you understand the database structure and the data flow in your project, then building out the features is not so hard. So yeah, here we have the classes data and the sections data, and each class and section are going to have the ID and name. And a section can belong to a certain class, and a class can have multiple sections. And we also have this students table, and this student is going to belong to a certain class and a certain section, and they have a name and an email. So yeah, we can go ahead and add in more features based on your needs, but for simplicity, we are just gonna deal with these tables for now. And yeah, this is the database diagram. Let's now go ahead and start working on the models and the migrations, and then we'll go ahead and set up the factories and seeders and the necessary relationships. So yeah, let's go ahead and open up our project, and let's start with the classes table. And the reason for naming this as classes is, if we name it as class, then yeah, it's gonna throw an error, because class is a reserved word in most of the languages like JavaScript and PHP as well. So yeah, we can't really use the keyword called class, and for that reason we are going to define this as a classes table as well as model. And yeah, let's start working on this. So the first thing that we'll define here is the class model. So artisan make model classes, and we'll also define the migration file for this. And while we are here, let's also go ahead and define the section model. Let's hit enter. And finally, let's go ahead and define the student model as well. Okay, let's hit enter, and let's go ahead and open up the migration files for each of these. So the first one is the classes table. Let's go ahead and pass the name of this class, and let's open up our section migration file. Let's go ahead and pass the name for the section, and we also need to define a foreign key that is going to be related to the classes table. So yeah, let's go ahead and do that. So table for an ID of class ID is going to be constrained to the classes table, and we can define the foreign ID as class ID. So yeah, that makes sense. Let's open up our students migration file, and let's go ahead and define the foreign keys for this. So this is going to have the foreign key of class ID and section ID. So I'll just copy this and pass the class ID. And I generally like to define the foreign keys at the top, because this gives us the idea about the relationship that this table has. And yeah, we have the name and the email. So let's go ahead and pass that. And yeah, you can pass in other constraints like unique and all the other stuff. That's all up to you. But yeah, for now, I'll just keep it like this. And let's go ahead and now migrate these. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. But since we are also going to define the seeders and the factories, so I will do that at the end of this video. Okay, so let's also go ahead and open up these models. So let's start with the classes model. Let's go ahead and define the fillable properties, and you can go ahead and define the guarded as well. That's all up to you, but yeah, for now I'll go ahead and define the fillable property, and let's go ahead and do the same for our section model as well. This is going to have the name and class ID, and let's open up our student model as well. This is going to have name, class ID, section ID, and the email. So let's go ahead and pass that. Okay, and let's start with the factories now, since we are going to deal with the seeders. So yeah, we need the factories. So let's start with the classes factory. So PHP artisan make factory. Okay, let's define the student factory. And let's also define the classes factory. And finally, let's define the section factory. Okay, let's go ahead and work on this student factory now. And for others, we don't have to do anything because we'll be populating these values from our seeder. But for the student factory, we need to pass the name and the email. So yeah, let's go ahead and pass those. And yeah, we could actually pass the classes and section factory, but yeah, the relationship is not going to be set up accordingly if we go this route. So I'll just go ahead and remove those. And for now, we'll just populate the name and the email. And for the class ID and section ID, we'll go ahead and pass those manually when we define the seeder. So yeah, let's save this, and let's now go ahead and define a seeder for our classes model, and then for other models as well, we'll define those data from the classes seeder itself. So yeah, let's go ahead and do that. Artisan make seeder, classes seeder. Let's define that. And before working on our seeder, let's go ahead and define the relationships. So a class can have many sections. So let's define that relationship. And let's open up our section model, and let's define the relationship of the student and the class. And since we are referencing this classes model, so by default, what Laravel is going to assume is, since we have this model as classes, so it's going to assume that we have a foreign key of classes underscore ID, but in our case, we have a relationship of class underscore ID. So if we have a different foreign key, in that case, we have to manually pass the foreign key, the name of the foreign key. So yeah, we can go ahead and pass the class ID as the foreign key in this case. And if we don't do it, then it's going to throw an error, because by default, it's going to expect a type of classes underscore ID. And in our case, we have a foreign key of class underscore ID. So yeah, we have to pass that. We need to let Laravel know that we have a different foreign key. So yeah, that's the reason we are passing this class ID. Let's also open up our student model, and let's pass the relationship in here as well. And for the section, okay, we don't have to pass this section ID because we are following the convention for the section. So yeah, we can get rid of that. Okay, so the final thing remaining here is to define the seeders. We have defined the models, we have defined the migrations, we have also defined the appropriate relationships, and we have also defined the factories. The only thing remaining here is to define the seeders. And I also thought of creating a seeder for our users, because once we perform the migration, again, we have to go ahead and register a new user. So yeah, instead of doing that manual work, I decided to define a seeder, which is going to automatically seed some data for our users table. So yeah, let's go ahead and define a seeder for our users table. So artisan make seeder users table seeder. Let's hit enter, and let's open that up. Okay, it is inside the seeders folder. We have the users table seeder, and I'll just go ahead and define a new array in here, which is going to seed some data. So the first array is going to be for the admin. And for now, we'll just define a single user. We don't need any other users. So yeah, let's go ahead and pass the name as admin. Let's pass the email as admin@admin.com, and the password as the encrypted version of the default password. So yeah, let's go ahead and do that. And finally, we also need to insert this data into the database. Otherwise, it's not going to work. It's not going to store that data. So yeah, let's go ahead and insert this data into the database in a single query. And we also need to import the user model. So yeah, let's go ahead and do that. And let's now go ahead and work on our classes seeder, because yeah, this is the final seeder that we need to work on. And without this, we don't have the dummy data to work with. So yeah, let's go ahead and define that. And again, instead of typing this from scratch, this is a relatively more complex as compared to our users table seeder. So I'll just go ahead and paste it, and then I'll explain to you each line of code. And yeah, I'll explain to you what each line of code does. So yeah, let's go ahead and paste that. And before explaining to you all this stuff, let me go ahead and import all of the necessary classes. So yeah, this is the classes model. Let's import that. Let's also import the section model. And we also need to import this sequence class provided by the factory package. And yeah, everything else looks good. So what we are doing here is we are using the factory of our classes model, and we are defining 10 records for our classes model. And for each of the sequence, that is for each of the iteration, what we are doing is we are passing the name as the class space and adding 1 to each of the index. So as you know that for loops or any sequence in programming starts with 0. So we are adding 1 to that index. So for the first sequence, since the index is going to be 0, so we are naming our class as class space and then 1. And for 10 sequences, this is going to be ranging from 1 to 10. And again, each class has a section or multiple section. And we are defining 2 sections for each class by passing the count of 2. And we are passing the state method. And this will basically grab each of these sequences for each of the iteration. So since in this case, we are defining 2 sections. So for the first iteration, this is going to grab this sequence. And for the second iteration, this is going to grab this sequence. And if we had, let's say, 4 sections defined for each of the class, then this would iterate between these 2 sequences. So for the first, it would grab this name. For the second, it would grab this name. For the third, it would again grab this name. And for the fourth, it would take this data. So yeah, sequence is basically iterating over all the possibilities for each of the iteration. So yeah, that's how the sequence thing works. And for our case, we are just defining 2 sections for each class. And the name for each section is going to be either section A or section B. And yeah, we are using the relationship in here called has. And this is going to store the section related data for each of this sequence or the iteration. And finally, each section has 5 students. Let's go ahead and import this student model. And again, we are using the student factory and defining 5 students for each section. Again, we are using the relationship of the section, and we have defined the relationship of student in our section model as well. We just did that. And again, we are passing the state. And for that state, we are passing the array of attributes, and we are injecting the current section, that is this section that we are creating. Let's say for the first section, this is going to have section A, and that section is being injected in here. And we are basically overriding the default attributes of class ID and passing the class ID of the current section model. And finally, we are creating these records. So yeah, this is going to store all of these configurations into the database. So yeah, this is the whole configuration for our student table along with the classes and section tables. So let's go ahead and define these in our database seeder. Otherwise, it's not going to seed the data. So let's open up the database seeder and call these one by one. So yeah, we can define these by using the this call, and we want to first seed the user related data. The sequence doesn't really matter, but still we want to seed the users first, and then we will run the classes seeder. So yeah, that's done. Let's now go ahead and run the migrations, and let's also seed the data. So what we can do here is we can run artisan migrate fresh, and along with that we can pass the seed option, which is also going to seed the data. Okay, let's run that command, and we have some errors in here. This is probably related to the relationship. So insert into sections name and classes ID. So this is assuming that we have a foreign key of classes ID, and where did that happen? So on the classes seeder, one table sections has no column name classes ID. Insert into sections, and let's try to look into the line. Okay, line number 41. Let's open that. Okay, this is actually the create method, so we can't really debug this. So let's open up our models accordingly. Okay, let's open up our classes model, and okay, from our classes model we are referencing this sections table, and we are passing has many section, but we have not passed the foreign key to this, and Laravel is going to assume that we have a foreign key of classes underscore ID in here as well, because we are referencing this relationship from the classes to the sections. So yeah, this is going to assume that we have a foreign key of classes ID, and that's the reason this is throwing an error. And as you can see, we are referencing our classes model and defining the sections relationship, and on our classes seeder we have referenced this accordingly. So yeah, I think this is the issue. So let's go ahead and pass the foreign key that we have in our sections model. That is, these two are referenced by this class ID. And let's now go ahead and give this a try. Artisan migrate fresh dash dash seed. Okay, seems like this worked. Let's now go ahead and look into this database in our database client. So I'll go ahead and open that up. Okay, so this is the database file. Let's go ahead and look into the classes table, and as you can see, we have classes from 1 to 10. This is the configuration that we defined in our seeder. And let's open up our sections table. So as you can see, we have section A and section B for each of the classes, so a total of 20 sections. And let's look into our students table as well. So here we have class ID 1, section ID 1 with the name, the email. So yeah, this looks good. And we have a total of 100 records in here as well. So yeah, this looks good. Our configuration is working fine. Let's also look into our users table. So we have a user of admin with the proper email and password. So yeah, this looks good. And in the next part, we'll be looking at displaying the data using the Inertia Vue Stack. So yeah, we'll define the table and start displaying the data. So yeah, that's it for this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Okay, let's now go ahead and start displaying the data that we seeded in the previous video. And since we have already looked at the basics of Inertia, so yeah, things like these are going to be relatively easy, because we have already looked at how we can display the data, how we can pass the data to our front end as prop, and how we can use API resources to properly format the data. So yeah, we'll be doing all of those stuff in this video by displaying the students related data in the front end. So yeah, let's go ahead and start working on this. So let's open up our code editor, and let's start by displaying the roots first. So yeah, let's open up our web.php, and since we only want the authenticated users to access the students route, so we'll be defining that over here. So route, and again we'll be defining the resource routes, and let's pass the students route over here, and the corresponding controller responsible for this is going to be the student controller class. And let's go ahead and define that controller. So artisan make controller student controller. Let's open that up, and let's go ahead and define that index method, and here we will just return the inertia method, and inside that we will define this index view inside the students folder. And let's also go ahead and grab the students data, So the students are going to be grabbed from the student model, and let's also import the student model. And while we are here, let's also go ahead and format this data accordingly using API resources. So I'll just wrap this and call the student resource collection. And again, we haven't defined this. So let's go ahead and define that over here. So artisan make resource student resource. And okay, while we are here, we also need to format the data of our classes and sections. So yeah, let's also go ahead and define those. So we need to define the classes resource to properly format the class related data. So let's go ahead and define that. And let's also define the student resource. Okay, section resource actually, because we have already defined student resource. So let's hit enter and let's import the student resource. Let's navigate to that, and here let's go ahead and format the data accordingly. So we'll pass the ID, the name, the email, and instead of passing the class like this, we will again format this class specific data using the classes resource API resource, and then call the class relationship. And we'll do the same for our section. So I'll use GitHub Copilot to generate that data. And since all of these are in the same folder, so we don't have to import them. Okay, so this looks good. We are displaying the ID, the name, the email, and the class and section related data. And we can even apply the when loaded to only pass these data when we are eager loading. So yeah, let's go ahead and do that as well. So this, when the class relationship is loaded, only then we want to pass this data. And we have looked into this in the previous section as well. And let's also go ahead and do the same for our section relationship. Okay, and on our student model, let's open that up. And here let's implement the width property to ego load the relationships. So protected with, and we want to load the class and section relationship, which are defined over here. So now whenever we load any student related data, the class and section related data will also be ego loaded. So yeah, that's done. Let's now go ahead and continue working on our flow. So this is also done. And on our controller, let's go ahead and pass the students related data. And now on our index.vue, okay, we also need to import the student controller on our web.php. So that's done. And let's now go ahead and work on the front end stuff. So on our resources, JS pages, let's go ahead and define a new students folder. And inside that, let's define that index.vue component. And here I'll just go ahead and paste the design, and then we will continue working on this. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and paste the design, and there are a few things that we still need to configure in here. Like we have this magnifying glass, which is a Vue component, and yeah, we still need to define this. So if we go ahead and try to render this, then it will throw an error. So yeah, let's go ahead and fix this first, and then we will look into the design. So yeah, we have to define this magnifying class inside the components icons namespace. So let's go ahead and do that. So here I'll define a new folder called icons, and inside that, let's define this magnifying class.vue component. And I'll go ahead and paste the code again for this, and then we will continue working on this. Okay, so let me just paste it, and this is just a simple SVG component which will be rendered alongside our search input field. So yeah, this is the simple SVG icon that will be displayed, and now we can save this. And if we go ahead and look into our design, let's open up the students route. Okay, we need to run the npm run dev command. I'm not sure, maybe I have not run that. Okay, I'm doing that, but this is not working. So I think this is again a bug of the Vite server. I don't know, maybe we can try to run this npm run dev command again by restarting it. And if we go ahead and reload, okay, that looks good. So yeah, this is the design, and let's now go ahead and start displaying the data from our backend. Okay, let's open up our student controller, and here we are passing the students related data. So yeah, we can receive that on our index.view and then start displaying the data. So let's go ahead and define the props object, and here we are receiving the students data, and the type in this case is going to be object, and this is required because without receiving this we won't be able to render the data. So yeah, we can pass that, and let's now go ahead and loop over this data on our table. So here we have the table head. I'll just fold it, and here we are displaying the tr. So let's loop over this tr. So we for student in students, so we are receiving the students as our prop, and we are naming each of our iteration as student. And we also need to pass in a key to this so that Vue.js can uniquely identify each of our iterations. So yeah, let's go ahead and pass the key, and the key in this case is going to be the student's ID. And one more thing that we still forgot in here is, since we are passing this data by wrapping it inside our resources, so what we need to do here is we need to access this data by calling students.data. Otherwise it will throw an error because our data will be wrapped in this data key. And now we can go ahead and display the student's ID. So let's go ahead and display the ID. Let's go ahead and display the student's name. Let's also display the student's email. And here, since we are also passing the classes related data, so yeah, we can access that by calling student.class.name, and we can also access the section data by calling the student.section.name, and this should be student instead of students. And here we can display the date it was created on, and we haven't passed that data, I think. Okay, we have not done that. So let's go ahead and pass the created at date by formatting this properly. So instead of that, I'll just go ahead and do to formatted date string. Okay, and let's go ahead and display that. So student.created at, and for the edit and delete buttons, we'll work on this later. So let's go ahead and save this, and yeah, this looks good, but the created at date is not displayed. So what could be the issue? Okay, we have the date, but still it is not rendered. So let's go ahead and look into it. So we have the student resource, and we are grabbing this created at. Let's try to pass today's string. Let's see what's going to happen. Okay, that works. Or we can also do to formatted date string. I think I misspelled this, or I passed a wrong method name. So yeah, that could be an issue. And if we now go ahead and reload, okay, this looks good. So I'll pass this as our formatted date string. And yeah, this looks good. So we have finally displayed all the data, and we have also used the API resources to properly format our data. So yeah, in the next video, we'll be looking at implementing the paginations. So yeah, that's also going to be an interesting one. And currently we are displaying all the records, as you can see. So yeah, we'll be looking at how we can implement server-side paginations. So yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one. Okay, let's now go ahead and start implementing paginations, and there are multiple ways to do this, and we could use any third-party packages to implement paginations, but still I wanted to implement this ourselves from scratch. And the reason to implement this ourselves is we might learn a thing or two while implementing this from scratch. So yeah, we'll be implementing the whole flow, and these will be server driven paginations. And by that I mean to say that whenever we fetch any data, that is, let's say from page 1 to page 2, when we try to fetch the data, they will be fetched from the server. And yeah, there's two ways of pagination. One is client side, where all the data is loaded at once and the pagination is performed on the client side. And there's server-side paginations as well, where the server will limit the data accordingly, and upon request will further pass additional data, that is the paginated data. So yeah, we'll be implementing the server-side pagination, which is actually a preferred way to paginate because it is more performant, and yeah, it's more memory efficient as well because we don't have to load all the data on the client side. So yeah, let's go ahead and start working on this. So instead of loading all the data in here, let's go ahead and start paginating on our backend first. And by default, 15 records are loaded in each pagination. So yeah, let's go ahead and pass 10 records because we want to load 10 records on each pagination. And now if we go ahead and reload, then as you can see, only 10 records are loaded initially. And when we navigate to another page, let's say if I navigate to page number 2, then the data from 11 to 20 will be rendered here. So yeah, this is the server-side pagination, and we now need a few links over here where the user can click on those links, and then we will be using Inertia to fetch those data and update our table accordingly. So yeah, let's go ahead and start working on this. So here we'll be defining a new component called pagination. So yeah, let's go ahead and start working on that. So inside components, I'll define a new Vue component called pagination, and I've already worked on the design. So I'll just go ahead and paste the design, and to grab the design, what I did was I just looked into the underlying implementation of the Laravel's pagination, and I looked into the Tailwind version because we are using the Tailwind stack here, and I just removed the PHP variables and the dynamic stuff from there, and I just have the HTML code with the Tailwind styling applied. And once I go ahead and paste that HTML code, we will then go ahead and start implementing this in Inertia and Vue.js. So yeah, let's go ahead and paste it, and then we will start working on this. Okay, so this is the design of our pagination component, and here we are just displaying some dummy placeholder data. That is the range of the data and the total results. And here we have the buttons, which are actually clickable buttons as links, and when they click on it, then we will programmatically navigate the user to that specific page. And yeah, let's now go ahead and render this on our index page. So here, instead of this links div, I'll just go ahead and replace that with the pagination. So let's pass that, and let's also go ahead and import that from the components pagination.vue namespace. And if we go ahead and reload, okay, as you can see, we have this data being rendered here. And one more thing that I want to mention here is, let's open up the pagination.vue. Then as you can see, we are conditionally applying some classes in here. So we want to apply these classes if the current page is active, and we will be applying these classes if it is not active. So I will be updating this later, but for now I've just passed these Boolean values. So yeah, just wanted to give you an idea about that, and let's now go ahead and start working on this. So on our index.vue, we are receiving this student's prop. So let's go ahead and log this data because there's some pagination related data as well on this student's prop. And we can do that by calling usepage dot props dot students. So let's go ahead and pass that, and okay, this is giving an error now, and we need to import that. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, let's try to import that from here using VS Code, and let's go ahead and open up the dev tool. Let's open up our console, and use page is not defined. Okay, so here we have this proxy, which is an object, and let's open up let's try to open the target. And here, as you can see, we have the data that we are currently rendering in here. So these students data are currently rendered, and along with that, we also have the links data, as you can see. So we have the first, the last, the next, and the previous. And the main pagination related data is on this meta object. As you can see, if we go ahead and fold it, then as you can see, we have the current page data. We have the range from which the data is being rendered, that is from 11 to 20. And we also have the total data, as you can see, and we also have links in here. So all the links that we can navigate for performing the pagination are inside this links object. And yeah, we can just use this meta object to basically perform the pagination. So yeah, let's go ahead and make use of this meta object and start displaying the links. And we can also display the range and all the active and inactive states accordingly. So yeah, let's go ahead and start doing that. So on our pagination.vue, what we can do here is we can pass the students data to our pagination component. And okay, let's navigate to that. So pagination, let's pass the data in here. So we'll name the prop as data and we'll pass the students data. And currently, if we pass it like this, then the string value of students will be passed. So if you want to interpret this properly, we'll just pass the semicolon, and now this will be passed as a dynamic value, and we can receive that on our pagination component. So let's go ahead and define the script tag, and let's pass the setup, and here let's define the props, and we want to receive the data in here. So the data is going to be of type object, and it is required, so I will pass that as well. And now what we can do here is let's go ahead and use the page again and display the meta related data in here. So use page.props.data.meta, and let's wrap this inside the log, that is the console.log, and let's get rid of the console.log from here because we only want to log the pagination related data. Okay, we should wrap this inside the parentheses, and okay, let's go ahead and give this a try now. So let's reload, and cannot read properties of undefined reading meta. So use page.props.data. Let's try to look into that, and that is undefined. So what did we do? On our index, we are passing the data. Okay, we need to pass the students dot data because our data is wrapped inside this data key. And if we go ahead and reload, that is still undefined. So let's navigate to the index page just to make sure that we don't face any errors. And on our pagination, we are defining the props of data, which is of type object, and that is required. Okay, I just went ahead and logged the data in here instead of doing that over here because there could be some asynchronous tasks running behind the scenes where the data might not be ready at this point. And yeah, I just went ahead and logged that over here, and now this is working. So we are defining this prop with the name of data, which is a type of object and is also required. And then on our index.vue, we are passing that data from our students.data collection object. And yeah, this is now working, and we can now use this data to display the pagination links. So yeah, this is the output, and we are dumping that over in here on our pagination.vue. So let's go ahead and remove that, and I'll just remove this commented code as well. And here we can use the data.meta object to display this data. So here we have the data.meta, and we can use the to key to display the starting range. And if we go ahead and reload, okay, we have an error, undefined reading to. So okay, let's try to dump this again because data.meta, let's see what the output is. Instead of data.meta, let's just go ahead and pass data. Okay, actually I made a really silly mistake. So instead of data, it should be just students. And if we go ahead and reload, and now we have the pagination links. So yeah, this is a really silly mistake. And now we can display that data in here. So this should be data.meta.to. And okay, now we have 10. Okay, the first key should be from. So let's replace that with from, and this should be actually to. So data.meta.to. And if we reload, then as you can see, this is a dynamic value now. And if we navigate to page 2 and reload, then as you can see, the data has been reflected accordingly. And for the total, we can use the same pattern. So data.meta.total. And here we have these buttons. So what we can do here is we can loop over this button to display all the links. So let's go ahead and do that. So v for link in data.meta.links. And if we just go ahead and reload, then as you can see, we have the same data being iterated over, and here we need to make this dynamic. So each link has some properties, and we can look into those properties by dumping them over here. So we have this students data. Let's go ahead and just dump that, and let's unfold the target object. And inside meta, we have these links, and each link, as you can see, has a URL. It also has a label, and it also has this active property, which will be set based on the current page number. So yeah, let's go ahead and first display the label, and we are displaying that over here. So let's go ahead and display that. But instead of displaying it like this, if we go ahead and look into this label, then as you can see, there's some less than sign and the previous value. So this is actually HTML, and we need to render this as HTML. And we can do that in Vue.js by calling this vhtml directive. So let's go ahead and pass that. And in this case, it is going to be link.label. So this is going to render the HTML data accordingly. And if we now go ahead and reload, then as you can see, the less than sign and the greater than sign are being rendered accordingly in here. And now let's go ahead and pass the classes accordingly. That is the active and inactive classes. And we have that as active. As you can see, we have this active property on each of our links. So we can use that to conditionally bind the classes. So we want to apply these classes if the link is active. So yeah, we can pass that link.active check in here, and we want to apply these classes if the link is inactive, and we can do that by passing the negation of link.active. And now as you can see, the page 2 is active currently, and that is being highlighted over here. And if we go ahead and navigate to page 1, then as you can see, this is active. So yeah, this is working properly. And we also want to apply some other attributes to this. As you can see, if we are on the first page, then we want to disable this previous button. And if we are on the last page, then we want to disable the next button. So yeah, let's go ahead and do that as well. And we can easily do that by passing conditional attributes over here. So we want to disable this if the link is active, or if there's no link dot URL property. And if we go ahead and reload, then as you can see, since we are on the first page, then as you can see, the previous button and the first page is disabled, but the second page, the third page, and all the other pages are now clickable, but the first page and the previous button is disabled. And yeah, we can further debug this by looking into our pagination related data in here. So we have the meta, and here we have the links. So for the first page, as you can see, the URL is null and the active is false. So yeah, we are checking either any of these is false or null. So based on that, this will be disabled. So yeah, let's go ahead and further work on this. So now what we want to do is whenever the user clicks on this button, we want to programmatically navigate to that specific page. And here, when they click on this button, then we can just execute a function. And yeah, let's go ahead and pass a function in here. So I'm gonna name this as update page number, because this is basically updating the page number. And along with this, we'll also pass the current link of this iteration, because this link is gonna hold the information of the page number that the user wants to be redirected to. And if we go ahead and again debug this, then as you can see, we have, let's say, page number 4, and inside that we have this label of 4 and the URL. So as you can see, we have the student's URL with the value of page equal to 4. So we want to programmatically navigate to this specific page when the user clicks on this button, which is this button rendered in here. So yeah, along with this button, when we call that method, we also want to pass this link so that we can programmatically visit this specific page when they click on this button. So yeah, we have passed that link now, and we also want to prevent the default behavior. So I'll just pass that prevent modifier to this, and let's now go ahead and define this update page number over here. So we have the define prompts. Let's go ahead and define this update page number, and along with that we'll also get the link. And here what we want to do is we want to get the page number first. So what I will do is I'll just define a new variable called page number, and we want to split the URL by the equal to sign. So let's go ahead and pass that, and we want to grab the first index of that, and I'll log this value, whatever we get over here, to let you understand what's happening in here. And if we go ahead and reload, okay, we don't have any errors. And if I go ahead and let's say click on page 2, then as you can see, since we are splitting this link using this equal to sign, and we are grabbing whatever is on the first index of that, we will get the actual page number. And now we can actually visit that specific page using the router that we have discussed in the first section as well. So yeah, let's go ahead and now work on that. So yeah, let's go ahead and use the router helper of Inertia, and we want to visit the slash students route, and we want to pass the page parameter along with this router, and the page in this case is going to be the page number that we have. And along with this, we'll also preserve the scrolling behavior. But first, let's try to implement this. Let's see how this is gonna behave, and then we will fix some possible issues. So yeah, let's now go ahead and give this a try. And as soon as I click on page 2, then as you can see, we were navigated to the top of the page, and we are now redirected to the page number 2. And along with that, all the data is reflected on our page. As you can see, the results are being updated accordingly. That is, the range is being reflected in here, and the pages are being rendered accordingly. So we are currently on page 2. So the active status is being rendered here, and the previous link is also active. So yeah, everything is working fine. And if we go to the 10th page, then as you can see, the next page after the 10th is disabled because we don't have any links in here. So yeah, everything is working fine, but as you can see, we have this scrolling issue where if we click on the pagination link, then we are navigated to the top of the page. So yeah, we want to prevent that, and we can do that by passing some additional parameters in here. So we want to preserve the scroll behavior of this page. And if we now go ahead and reload and give this a try, then as you can see, the scrolling behavior is now preserved, and this gives a really smooth experience to the user. So yeah, this is really good experience. And one last thing that I want to fix here is, along with the loop that we are performing in here, I also want to pass a key to this, because whenever we are iterating over some items, we also need to pass the key. And in this case, I'll just use the index of this loop by passing the index in here. And we can pass that key to this by calling this key and then pass the index. So yeah, just wanted to make sure that we are passing a key to prevent some possible issues that we might face in the future, and everything is working fine, as you can see. So yeah, we have finally implemented server-side paginations, which are really efficient because these will only be loaded when the user clicks on these, and they are being grabbed from the server. So yeah, this is really performant, and we have implemented this from scratch using Inertia.js. And I know that this video got really lengthy, but I hope that you learned some new stuff along the way. And in the next part, we'll be working on the create flow. So yeah, we'll work on that in the next video. Okay, let's go ahead and start working on the record creation flow. And in this video, we'll just go ahead and render the page and work on the design and set up the form. And in the upcoming video, we'll go ahead and implement the dependent dropdowns. So yeah, let's go ahead and start working on this. So let's open up our code editor, and let's start with the controllers first, because we have been following the convention to start with the controllers. So yeah, let's go ahead and define the create page. And here we'll just go ahead and render the create page inside the student's namespace. And along with this, we also need to pass the classes related data. So while we are here, let's also go ahead and do that. So we'll just grab the classes data, and okay, let's import the classes model, and we want to grab all the classes. And since we have already defined the resource for this, so let's go ahead and wrap that inside the classes resource and call the collection. And now we can pass these data over to our create page. And okay, let's go ahead and define this create page inside the student's namespace. So create dot view, and here I'll just go ahead and paste the design, and then we will further work on this. So yeah, this is the design for our page, and we have some dummy data that we are currently rendering in here. So as you can see, we have an option with a dummy value of 1 and section A, and we also have the classes related data, and everything else is something that we have already discussed. So we have the name, the email, and yeah, this is a really simple template, but we still need to work on a few stuff in here. So what we can do here is let's open up our dashboard, because we will be grabbing some stuff from here. So I'll just copy the head and the authenticator layout code along with the template, and I'll work on other stuff accordingly. So yeah, I'll just paste that over here, and again open up the dashboard, and I'll copy the ending authenticator layout and paste that over here. Let's also go ahead and copy this block of code, because we need to import the authenticator layout and the head component. So yeah, let's go ahead and paste that over here, and this should now render properly. And instead of dashboard, this is going to be create student, and header looks good. Okay, this should be create student. And what else do we need? Okay, we need to hook this up in our front end. So when the user clicks on this add student, we need to render that. So let's go ahead and do that as well. So on our index, we have that button. So instead of this traditional A tag, we will be using the Inertia's link tag, and this also expects a prop of href, and here we can pass the route. So let's go ahead and pass that route over here, and the route in this case is going to be students dot create. And again, to interpret this properly, we need to pass the colon in here. So now if we go ahead and hover over the add student, okay, we need to define this as a link, otherwise it will not be a native link tag. And if we go ahead and reload, okay, this is still not working. So what's happening in here? So link href, and okay, we have not imported this link. So let's go ahead and do that from the Inertia.js Vue 3 package. And okay, this looks good, but this is still not being rendered as a link. So what we can do here is, okay, maybe we can remove this as prop, and let's go ahead and give this a try. Okay, so that works. So initially I tried to pass that because it was not rendering properly, and now this looks good. So now when I click on this, then as you can see, we are redirected to the create page. And let's also go ahead and populate the classes related data. So that should be pretty easy. So we are passing this data from our create page to our create Vue component, and here we can receive that. So let's define the props, and we will be receiving the classes data, which is gonna be of type object and is required. So let's go ahead and pass that. And now we can loop over the classes data in here. So we have a default value of selector class, so we'll keep that. But for the options, we can loop over these as item. We can't really name this as class because it is a reserved word in JavaScript. So yeah, let's name this as item in classes dot data. So remember to append the data in here because we are using the resources. So yeah, this is going to be wrapped in the data key, and let's also pass a key to this. So I'll get rid of the sidebar, and let's pass a key of item dot id, and the value in this case is gonna be, okay, what's happening in here? We have an error. Key is gonna be item dot id, and let's pass the placeholder or the label. So the label is gonna be item dot name, and the value is gonna be item dot id, and we can interpret that by again passing the colon. So yeah, let's save this, and if we go ahead and reload, then as you can see, all the classes are rendered here, and this is again coming from the database. So yeah, that's it for this video, and we still have a few things to implement in this record creation flow. That is to implement dependent dropdowns, and we also need to display the validation errors, and then we will finally store this data into the database. So yeah, in the next video, we'll be implementing the dependent dropdown functionality, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Okay, let's now go ahead and implement the dependent dropdown functionality, and we will be using the watchers of Vue.js to achieve this. And the idea behind this implementation is we will just watch for the change in our class ID, and whenever that changes, we will just go ahead and execute a function that will fetch the section related data from the API, and we'll define an API to grab the sections based on a certain class ID. And yeah, we'll just go ahead and populate whatever data we get from that API into our form, that is the select form. So yeah, that is the general idea, and let's now go ahead and start working on this. And in the previous video, I mentioned that we would define the form and hook up the forms with our form helper. But yeah, I forgot that. So let's go ahead and do that in this video itself. So let's start by importing the use form from the Inertia Vue 3 package. And let's go ahead and define a new form. So I'm going to name this as form, and let's use the use form helper. And since we want to store the student's data, so we need to keep track of the name, the email, the class ID, and the section ID. And since we are on the create page, so everything is going to be empty initially, that is empty strings, and these will be populated when the user starts typing into the fields. And yeah, we have looked into this already in the previous section as well. So yeah, let's go ahead and hook this up into our forms. So we have the name, and let's go ahead and remodel this with our form.name, and we'll work with validations later. Let's first go ahead and implement the dependent dropdown functionality, and we'll model our email with the form.email property. And for the class, let's model that with the form.class ID. And for the section, let's go ahead and model that with the form.section ID. So I'm using the GitHub Copilot to generate these codes, but yeah, sometimes it is not accurate and doesn't work as expected. So yeah, this is done. And how do we grab the section related data every time the class ID changes? So yeah, we can basically use a watcher to watch for this class ID. And whenever that changes, we will just go ahead and execute a function which will grab the sections data from an API. So yeah, let's first define this watcher, and I'll use the watch method from Vue. So that is important. And here we want to watch for the form.class ID, and I'm not sure whether passing it like this directly in here will work. I think it doesn't work. So let's go ahead and give this a try, and if it doesn't work, then we will fix it. So for the new value, we will use a closure. We'll pass a closure to this, and here let's just go ahead and console log this new value. So every time this form.class ID changes, we will get that value in here as a closure, and that will be passed as a parameter. And here for now, we are just logging that value into our console. So if we go ahead and reload, let's also open up the inspector tool, and let's open up the console. And invalid watch source, yeah, this doesn't work. So what's actually happening in here is the form that we have defined in here is actually a reactive property, and to watch for reactive properties, what we need to do is we need to pass a closure and then define the reactive property as a return value. And if we now go ahead and reload, then as you can see, the error is now gone. And if I go ahead and select class 2, then as you can see, the ID of the class 2 is logged in here. So yeah, we can now use this to grab the section related data from an API, and based on that, we can populate the sections data in here. So yeah, let's go ahead and do that. So let's define a method in here called get sections, and we'll pass the value to this that we receive as a parameter. And let's go ahead and define that get sections, and we'll get the class ID that is being passed from here. And here we'll just make an Axios request to our backend and grab the sections data. So let's first go ahead and define that API. And instead of defining that in our web.php, let's define that on our API. And since we are using Laravel 11, we need to enable the APIs. So let's go ahead and do that. And I don't exactly remember the command, so I'll just look into it. And I think it's install API or API installed. Okay, install API. This is going to create the API routes and also install Laravel Sanctum, which in this case is not necessary, but still let's go ahead and do it. And yeah, let's install the APIs. Artisan install API, and yeah, this is going to install the Laravel Sanctum and enable the API routes. So our new database migration has been published. Would you like to run all pending database migrations? Yeah, we need to do that. And now if we navigate to our API PHP, let's go ahead and define a new route in here for the sections. And yeah, we'll define a new controller called section controller, and we'll define an index method on our section controller. But we can make this invocable as well because we don't have any other API routes. So yeah, we can do that. And we don't actually need a name for this. So I'll just skip defining a name for this, and let's also go ahead and define this section controller. And again, I'll use proper namespacing in here because that makes our project a bit more maintainable. So yeah, let's define this inside the API namespace because this is actually serving an API. So artisan make controller, we want to define this inside the API namespace, and the name of the controller is going to be section controller. So let's hit enter, and let's go ahead and define the invocable method in here. So public function invoke, and along with this we will also get the class ID, and I also want to validate that. So let's go ahead and define a new form request, which is going to validate the class ID that we receive as a parameter. And I'm going to name this as list sections data. This because this is essentially doing that. List sections request. I think that makes more sense. And let's now go ahead and define that again on a proper namespace. So artisan make request inside API. Let's define list sections request. Let's hit enter, and let's go ahead and start working on this. So for this authorize check, I'll go ahead and pass true because we are making a request from an authenticated page. And yeah, we could go ahead and implement the authentication related checks in here, but I don't want to go so much deeper into this because this is not an API specific course. So yeah, I'll just go ahead and pass true for this case. And for the rules, we will implement the validation for our class ID. So that is required and should exist in our classes table. So yeah, that is the validation that we want to implement here. And now let's go ahead and import this form request class, and let's grab the sections by checking for the request class ID, and we have defined this relationship already. Every section belongs to a certain class. So yeah, we should get valid sections now. And let's also go ahead and wrap these in our section resource. So let's go ahead and wrap them. So section resource collection, and then we want to pass the sections data. So let's also import the section resource, and yeah, we now should have the valid sections related data based on this class ID. And along with that, we are also implementing proper validations and we are formatting the data accordingly. So yeah, this looks good. Let's now go ahead and implement this API flow. Let's finalize this. So we can import this from the API namespace, and let's go ahead and make the request now. So on here, when we call get sections, we just want to make an Axios request, which is of type get. I think we have defined that already. So yeah, this is a type of get request, and we want to get the API / sections data. And along with that, we will also pass the class ID, which is the class ID that we are receiving as a parameter. So that's done. And then we will grab the response and let's pass that inside a function. And here we can just go ahead and console log whatever data we get when we call this. So yeah, let's go ahead and give this a try and let's see whether our implementation is working fine or not, and then we will further work on this. So yeah, let's go ahead and give this a try. I'll just get rid of everything, and the moment I select class 1, okay, we get uncaught in promise request field with the status code 404. So why is that happening? API sections, and we are defining that inside the API namespace because by default these are prefixed with API. Since we are using the .then convention, we don't even have to make this as async. 404 Axios error, bad request. So why is this happening? let's select a class and okay, sections class ID equal to 1 API students. I'll just go ahead and try to copy this request and try to make a request from the browser. Okay, let's open up a new tab, Inertia Vue Students Management, Students API Sections. Okay, so this is making a request to the students slash API slash sections. So that is an issue, and we can fix that by passing this slash at the beginning, and that should now fix that issue. And if we go ahead and reload and again give this a try, class 1, and as you can see, the data is being received from our backend. And if we go ahead and look into it, then we should see the appropriate sections data. So each of these sections belongs to class 1, as you can see. And if we go ahead and select, let's say class 10, then yeah, the appropriate data for class 10, that is the sections belonging to class 10, are received in here. So yeah, this looks good. Let's now go ahead and render this, and to store these data we will use a variable in here because we can't really populate this from here. So we'll store these in a variable, and from there we will loop over them and display them. So yeah, let's go ahead and define a variable on here, and we can do that. Okay, let's do that over here. So let sections is going to be a reference. We'll define a ref, and that is initially going to be an empty object. And whenever we receive this data, we can just go ahead and use ref. Okay, not ref, but sections dot value to whatever value we have over here. And now we can loop over them over in our select component. So here, okay, we have the options. So let's loop over them. Option v4 equal to section in sections. Okay, let's spell that correctly. And the value is gonna be section dot id. We need to pass this colon in here to interpret this properly. And let's pass the placeholder. So this is section dot name. And let's also pass a key to this because we are looping over these data. So the key in this case is going to be section.id. Okay, so let's go ahead and give this a try. And we have some errors. Reference is not defined. So let's go ahead and import that from Vue ref, and let's reload. And now if I go ahead and let's say currently there's no any section related data because we have not selected any class. But the moment I select class 1, okay, we still have some errors, and that is we forgot to append the dot data in here. So here we have the sections. Let's pass the dot data because we are wrapping these inside our API resources. So yeah, we need to pass that. And if we now go ahead and reload, so we don't have any data currently, but if I go ahead and select class 1, then as you can see, section A and section B are populated here, and these sections actually belong to class 1. We have verified that already. So yeah, this thing is working fine. And the next step is to implement validations. So yeah, we'll be working on that in the next video. Okay, let's now go ahead and display the validation messages, and then we will finalize this whole flow. That is the record creation flow in this video. So yeah, let's go ahead and open up our code editor, and to display the validation messages, what we will be doing is we will be taking some inspirations from the existing implementation of the Laravel Breeze package. And if we go ahead and look into this update password form, then as you can see, we have this text input defined in here, and along with that, this input error is being passed to it, and this also expects a message prop, and in that message this is passing the errors for the current password. So yeah, we can use this to display the validation messages. So yeah, what I will do is I'll just go ahead and copy this and paste that over in our index.vue to display the validation messages, because yeah, we can basically reuse that And okay, we should be actually implementing this on our create.vue. And here we have the name. So instead of this paragraph, I'll just paste that code that I just copied, and let's go ahead and import this from the components namespace. And for the message, this is gonna be form.errors.name. And let's go ahead and do the same for the email field. So here we can paste that, and the property in this case is going to be email. So let's pass that, and let's do the same for our class. So in this case, the property is going to be class ID, and let's do the same for our select as well. So let's paste that over here, and this is going to be section ID. And there are a few things remaining. That is the class binding. So here we need to bind these error classes accordingly. And let's just go ahead and look into the current implementation. So we have the text input, and okay, this is not implementing that, I think. And if we go ahead and look into the underlying class, okay, this is not implementing the conditional classes when the validation error happens. So yeah, we can implement that ourselves over here. Okay, we should open create.vue, and here we have the error, and these are the classes that we want to pass if we have an error for our name. So yeah, let's go ahead and start working on this. So we can pass in additional classes to this by calling the class colon, and inside an object we can pass the classes that we want to apply if we have errors related to the form.errors.name. So for this specific key, if there's an error in our validation object, then we can just go ahead and apply these classes. So I'll just cut these from here and paste that over here. And we can basically use GitHub Copilot to implement the same for other fields as well. So let's get rid of these and pass the conditional class binding. And okay, that looks good. And let's do the same for the class ID as well. So I'll just remove this block of code and pass the conditional class binding for this class ID as well. And let's finally implement the same for our section as well. So let's get rid of this and let's pass that over here. Okay, and yeah, that looks good. Let's now go ahead and give this a try. So I'll try to make a validation error, and okay, we haven't implemented this on our backend. So yeah, let's go ahead and do that as well. So on our student controller, let's define a method called store, and we'll be implementing the validations as well. Otherwise, this won't be triggered if we don't implement it on our backend. And the name of the request is going to be store student request. Let's pass that, and let's go ahead and define this using our command. So artisan make request store student request. Let's hit enter and let's open that up. And for the authorization check, we will only let authenticated users to create a new student. So let's go ahead and pass that check, and we can do that by calling auth check. And for the rules, let's go ahead and pass the rules for name, email, class ID, and section ID. And here, let's also pass section ID, which is going to be required and exist in our sections table. So yeah, this looks good. Let's now go ahead and implement this whole flow. Let's import the student request, and we can just create that by using the student create and pass the request validated, because we have performed the validations at this point, and we can now redirect to the index page. So yeah, we won't be passing any flash messages in here because that would be kind of a repetitive process, and we have implemented this already in our first section. So yeah, I'll be skipping that, and you can go ahead and implement this if you want to practice your skills. So yeah, this flow is implemented. Let's now go ahead and hook this up in our front end. So whenever we submit our form, we need to make that request And we have that form over here. So let's go ahead and pass that @submit. And we also want to prevent the default behavior. So we can pass that dot prevent modifier, and let's go ahead and call the create student method. And let's define that over here. Const create student is going to be a function, and here we will use the form and make a post request to the students route. And instead of passing this static string, let's go ahead and pass the Ziggy route, and this is going to be students dot store, and along with that we will also pass the data that our form holds. And on success, we don't have to do anything because we will be redirected to the index page. So yeah, we can basically get rid of this and we are good to go. Okay, maybe I need to remove this properly, so I'll get rid of everything. And yeah, we'll just make a post request to the students.store. And if we have any validation errors, then that will be reflected accordingly in our forms. And if the request is successful, then we will be redirected to the index page. So yeah, let's go ahead and give this a try. Let's try to make validation errors. I'll just click on save. Then as you can see, we have validations working now. So we have the name field, the email field is required, and the class ID and section ID is required. But this is kind of not so readable. So instead of that, we can override this by passing the attributes method in our request. So let's go ahead and do that. So public function attributes, and we just want to override the attributes for the class ID and section ID. And yeah, we could also do the same for the name and email. This is also more readable. So yeah, I'll just keep it like this. And for the class ID and section ID, we want to pass the names as class and section, which is more readable. So yeah, let's go ahead and give this a try again. I'll click on save, and now the changes are reflected accordingly in here. And yeah, let's now go ahead and try to create a new record. So I'll pass some name. Let's pass an email address of some mail@gmail.com. And again, if you have other validations that you want to perform, like in this case, you could pass the unique validation check or any other validation that you want to perform. That's all up to you. And this is again Laravel related stuff. So yeah, this depends on the requirement. And for now, I think this makes sense. So yeah, let's go ahead and try to create a new student. I'll just choose class 1 and section A. Let's go ahead and click on save, and we are redirected to the index page. And as you can see, we have 11 pages in here. So that means the record was created. And if we navigate to the 11th page, then yeah, the record that we just created is stored in here with the appropriate class and section data. So yeah, this is working. And there's one more thing that I want to fix in here. That is, if we check our create page, then as you can see, we have this layout that we are extending on our create page, but on our index page, as you can see, we don't have that, and the design is a bit off. So yeah, let's go ahead and fix this in this video itself. And we just need to extend the app layout that we are doing in our create page as well. So I'll just go ahead and copy this block of code, and on our template, let's go ahead and paste that. And we can end our template with the authenticated layout. And we also need to import that from the appropriate namespace. So we need the authenticated layout and the head. So I'll just pass that manually in here. Let's paste that, and we need to import the head component from Vue 3. And for the title, this is going to be students list. Let's save that. And if we go ahead and reload, okay, we also need to update this. So this is going to be students list. Let's save that. And yeah, this looks good. So yeah, that's it for this video. And in the next part, we will be looking at editing these records. So yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one. Okay, let's now go ahead and work on the record update flow. And just like in our previous videos as well, we will start with the controller first and then implement the front-end related stuff. So yeah, let's open up our student controller, and here we have the record creation related methods. So the create and the store. So here, let's go ahead and define an edit method, which will render the student's edit component. So let's go ahead and define that. And yeah, GitHub Copilot is kind of accurate in this case because we also need to pass the classes related data, because yeah, they might update the student's class data as well. So yeah, let's go ahead and just hit tab, and we'll also pass the classes related data. And this is actually generated from the create page. As you can see, this is kind of same implementation with a few changes. So we need to render the edit component, and we are also passing the classes data. And let's also go ahead and work on the update method while we are here. And yeah, let's populate this as well. So we will be using the root model binding, and let's also define the form request. So update student request, and we'll also pass the student record, and we can use the root model binding to grab that student. And okay, let's also pass the request variable, and let's copy the form request name and define that using the command. So update student request, and let's navigate to that. So here we will check for the user's authentication status by calling auth check, and for the rules, we can use the rules that we define in the create flow. So the name, the email, the class ID, and section ID is required, and these should exist in the respective tables. And while we are here, I also wanted to implement the unique check. So let's go ahead and do that. So for the email, this has to be unique, and we want to check it in the students table. The column is going to be email, and for our update flow, we also need to pass the accept ID, which is the ID that we want to ignore while checking for this validation. And we can do that by calling this student, and we have that access because we are using the root model binding, and this in this specific class actually refers to the request class. So yeah, we are actually calling request and then student and the ID. And since we are using root model binding, we can access that. So yeah, that is done. Let's save this. And for the attributes, we can use the same code. So yeah, I'll just pass that. And let's now go ahead and finalize this. So we'll import the update student request. As you can see, that is imported, and let's just go ahead and finalize this. So we'll update the student that we are receiving as a parameter and call the request validated. And once that is done, we will just redirect to the index page. So let's save this, and let's now go ahead and work on the front end stuff. We haven't added the edit page yet, so let's go ahead and do that. So I'll just navigate to this create.vue, and I'll just copy this and paste it again. And since this is going to be almost similar to the create flow with a few changes, so yeah, we can update that and make a few changes. So now we will be getting the student's ID as well as a prop in this page. So we need to do that. So on the edit page, we need to pass the student ID. And again, here we will be using the root model binding to grab that student, and let's pass that student. And to format that data, we can use the student resource API resource. And instead of this new convention, I'll just use the make convention because I prefer this syntax, and we have been doing this in our project along the way. So yeah, let's save this, and now we have the current record that we are editing, and we are sending that as a prop to this edit component. We can now access that over here. So along with the classes, we can also receive the student prop, which is again will be of type object and is required. So let's save that. And now we can populate our form with the prop that we are receiving over here. And yeah, we can use the use page. So let's go ahead and do that. So use page dot props dot student dot name. And okay, this is kind of inaccurate in this case. So instead of name, this is going to be email. This will be class ID, and this will be section ID. So yeah, that's done. And we still want to watch for the class ID. And yeah, this implementation will be same, because whenever the class ID is changed, we want to execute this get sections method to grab the sections related to a certain class. And here, instead of create student, let's name this as update student. And instead of post, we want to make a put request to students dot update. And along with that, we also need to pass the student ID. And okay, what I will do is, instead of defining this use page everywhere, I'll just define a new variable called student and assign that to the student prop. And now we can replace all of this with a simple syntax. And on here as well, when we are calling the students.update, we can directly call student.id. And okay, let's see, we need to pass update student in here. And let's also update the title with update student. And when the user submits the form, we want to call update student, and everything else will work as usual. So we have the validations, we have the email that is being modeled accordingly with our form. And since we are passing these data in here, so all of the forms are going to be filled accordingly based on this name that is being grabbed from the database through root model binding. So yeah, this should work. And let's see, there might be a few things that we want to change. So instead of save, let's pass update, and let's also go ahead and pass a route to this, to our cancel button. So instead of a tag, let's replace that with link. And the route in this case is going to be the student.index, and we want to interpret this property. So I'll pass the colon to this, and yeah, this should now work. Okay, so this looks good. Let's now go ahead and give this a try. Let's see if we have any errors. And we also need to hook this up in our index. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's open up our index.vue and let's navigate to the edit button. And let's replace that with link. And the route in this case is going to be students.edit. And along with that, we also want to pass the student ID, which is this student that we are currently iterating over. So yeah, let's go ahead and pass that student.id. And we also need to interpret this as a JavaScript value. So we can pass the colon to this. And okay, we don't have any errors. So that looks good. And if we go ahead and reload, okay, we have some errors. I think we haven't imported something probably. So cannot read properties of undefined reading ID. Okay, we have this dot in here. So let's remove that. And that should be actually a comma. Okay, let's save that and let's give this a try. Let's reload and let's go ahead and click on edit. Okay, we have some errors now. Failed to resolve component link. Let's go ahead and import that on our edit. So let's import that from the Inertia Vue 3 package. And okay, we still don't have the data in here. And the reason for this not being populated is, I think we need to pass the data key, since we are wrapping our student inside the student resource. So yeah, the data has been wrapped in the data key. So yeah, we need to address that as well. And we can do that by calling .data over here or in here as well. So we can pass .data, or we can directly do that over here. So let's try to do it over here. Let's see if there's any error. And if it doesn't work, then we will append it over here. Okay, that looks good, but the class ID is not working. So what's happening again? Okay, let's try to debug this on our Vue.js DevTools. And if you have any errors related to the data being not synced properly on these edit pages, then you can always go ahead and look into the Vue.js DevTool to understand what's actually happening. And yeah, let's go ahead and open up the edit component, and okay, that doesn't seem to load properly. So I'll just reload it once. That is still not working. So what's happening in here? Okay, I'll just open that up again, and let's click on the edit. And if we go ahead and look into the form and try to look into the class ID, then as you can see, we have this undefined. So what's actually happening here is we are calling this class ID on our student object, but what we are actually doing on our student resource is we are passing the class as a resource again. So yeah, the class ID doesn't exist, but an object of the class exists. So yeah, we can actually reference that object by using class.id, and the same goes for the section. So let's do that as well. And here we also need to grab the section related data, since as you can see, we are not passing that data over here. So we need to hook into the onMounted lifecycle method of Vue.js to grab the initial sections that this class has. So initially we have a class 1 selected. So we need to grab those sections from our database and populate that data accordingly in here. So yeah, let's go ahead and do that. So let's call the onMounted over here somewhere. So I'll just call that in here, and let's pass a closure inside here, and we can just call get sections, and we want to get these sections based on the form.class.id, and we have defined that already. In here, as you can see, we only need to pass the class ID, and this is gonna populate the sections property accordingly based on the response. And yeah, that should populate the sections data accordingly. So yeah, let's give this a try, and okay, this should be class.id instead of class id.id. So if we go ahead and reload, okay, that is still not working. So cannot read properties of undefined reading id. Okay, this should be actually class id because we are referencing our form. So let's reload, and now as you can see, section A is populated accordingly, and we also have other data being populated here. So yeah, this flow looks good. Let's now go ahead and finalize this, and we can do that by trying to update this record. And we have implemented the backend stuff already. So we have the update method implemented along with the validations and the root model binding. So here we are validating the record and calling student update, and finally redirecting to the index page. So what I will do is I'll just go ahead and update this record, and this is the student ID 1. So yeah, we should see that record on the first page, and I'll keep everything else as usual. And if one record is updated, it means that the flow is working. So yeah, let's go ahead and try to update it. And as you can see, this is the record that we just updated, and yeah, the flow looks good. And in the next part, we'll be looking at the record deletion flow. So yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one. Okay, let's now go ahead and implement the record deletion flow. And again, we'll start with a controller. So yeah, let's go ahead and define a method called destroy. And here again, we are following the resourceful route convention. So yeah, let's go ahead and define that destroy method. And here we can use the root model binding to grab the student model. And here we will just delete that and redirect to the index page. So yeah, that's done. Let's now go ahead and implement this on our front end. So on our index.view, here we have the delete button. And when they click on this, then we will execute a function, and to that function we'll pass the ID that we are currently iterating. And from there, we'll just use the form helper to make a delete request to our backend. So yeah, let's go ahead and do that. So when we click on this, we just want to call a method called delete student. And to this, we also want to pass the ID of the student. So let's go ahead and pass that, and let's go ahead and define this. So on the script section, let's define the delete student method, and to this method we will get the student ID. So I'll call that student ID, and here again we'll define a new form helper called delete form, which is gonna be a simple use form helper without any data. So yeah, we can use that and call that in here. So we can do delete form dot delete, and we want to make a request to the students dot destroy route. So let's pass that, and along with that we'll also pass the student ID. So let's pass that, and what I also want to do here is I want to show a confirmation message that will be implemented using the simple confirmation dialog, and just to prevent from accident record deletions. So yeah, this will just show a confirmation dialog, and when they click on OK, then we will go ahead and execute this block of code. So yeah, let's just go ahead and wrap this inside an if condition, and here we will pass confirm, which is a simple JavaScript dialog, and we can say, are you sure you want to delete the student? And then we will go ahead and delete that by calling the delete form dot delete, and we have the route as students dot destroy, and we are passing the student ID. So yeah, now when we call this, then we will be executing this destroy method, and when that happens, then we will just go ahead and delete that student and redirect to the index page. So yeah, let's go ahead and give this a try. Okay, let's try to reload, and for some reason this is giving us an error. Students index.vue, does the file exist? So I think we probably implemented something by mistake. So let's go ahead and remove that. And now this should work. Okay, this still has some issues. So let's try to inspect it. And p is not a function. So what's happening? Okay, I think we need to pass an empty object to this, or let's try to see what could be the possible issue, and if this is the issue, then we will go ahead and fix it later. But let's see, let's look into our implementation. So we are calling delete student, and we are passing the student dot ID. So yeah, that looks good. And on our use form, let's go ahead and pass an empty object, and let's reload. Okay, so we don't have that error anymore. So yeah, that was the issue. So we need to pass an empty object to this, otherwise it will throw an error. Okay, let's go ahead and give this a try now. So when I click on delete, then we will get this confirmation dialog. And if I click on cancel, nothing's gonna happen. And notice that we are currently trying to delete this student with an ID of 1. So let's go ahead and delete it. Click on OK, and we are redirected back. And as you can see, the student ID 1 is deleted. So yeah, this thing is working. And in the next part, we'll be looking at implementing the search functionality. So yeah, we'll be working on this in the next video. Okay, let's now go ahead and implement the search functionality. And before actually implementing this in our code editor, let's talk about the flow. Let's discuss how we will be implementing this, and then we will go ahead and actually implement it. So as you can see in here, we have this input field for searching the data, and we will be defining a variable, and we will be binding that accordingly to this field. And whenever the user types into this field, we will be keeping track of that variable and building up a URL. And whenever that URL changes, we will programmatically visit that page using the router.visit, which we have talked about a lot in the previous section as well. So let's say a user types something like some data, then we want to visit a URL in the browser based on the value that the user types in here. So let's say if the user types some data in this field, then we want to pass that into our URL with the key as search, and the value would be some data. And we will be implementing this on our backend accordingly, where we will grab the term by the search value, and then we will filter that data accordingly on our backend. So yeah, this is the general idea, and let's now go ahead and work on this. So let's open up our code editor, and let's start by defining a variable to keep track of the user entered value. So we can do that over here. So let's define a new search, and we will be using a reference to define an empty string. And we also need to import this ref from Vue. So let's go ahead and do that. Import ref from Vue, and let's go ahead and bind this accordingly into our input field. So we have that over here. So let's model this to our search variable, and if we now go ahead and reload, so here we have the index, and we have defined the search, which is a ref. And if we go ahead and type something in here, okay, that is not working. So what's happening in here? We don't have any errors, and this is not reflected accordingly. So I think there's probably some issues in here. So let's try to display that over here just to make sure that this is working. Let's try to pass some data. Then as you can see, this is being reflected over here. So yeah, this is working. So now what we can do is we can build up a variable based on the search term, and whenever that variable changes, we will be manually visiting that page. And we also need to implement this on our backend, but first let's go ahead and implement this in our frontend, and the backend stuff is really easy once we figure out the frontend stuff. So again, let's define a new variable, and I'm going to name this as students URL, which is going to be a computed property, and we will be computing this based on multiple factors. Like in this case, we will be computing that based on the page number and the search term. So let's go ahead and define this, and you will be passing this inside a closure. And here we can define this URL variable, and we will be passing this new URL object, which is a JavaScript function, and we are passing the students.index route to this, which is again going to be built up based on the app URL that we have configured in our environment. So yeah, based on the app URL that we have in here, we will be building that up accordingly. And whenever the search input changes, which is this value, then we will go ahead and compute the student's URL accordingly based on the search value. So here we can check if the search dot value has a certain value, then we will just go ahead and append the search value into the URL, and we can do that by passing the URL dot search params dot append, and the key in this case is going to be search, and the value will be whatever value we get from our ref, that is this defined in here. And along with this, I also want to pass the page number, because currently we have not passed that. So whenever we perform any search operations, we just want to reset the page to the first page, because let's say if a user is on the 5th page, and when they try to perform some search, then there might be cases where only a few number of data is returned for that keyword. So in that case, the user will still stay on the 5th page and they won't be able to view that data. So whenever they perform any search, we just want to navigate to the first page, and we want to show the results by resetting the pagination. So let's go ahead and define one more variable in here. And instead of defining multiple lets, what we can do here is we can define one more variable like this, and this is again will be a ref, and this is going to have an initial value of 1. And here again we can append the search params by passing the page key, and the value in this case will be page number dot value. So now if we go ahead and try to debug our students URL, then that should be built up accordingly, and we can do that on our Vue DevTools, but we have some errors. So let's try to understand what's happening in here. Let's see what's the error, and we can do that on our console. So computed is not defined. So let's go ahead and import that from the Vue package. So let's do that, and if we go ahead and reload, okay, that works. So let's open up the Vue DevTools, and here we have the index, and we have some computed data that we defined. So we have the props, we have the setup, and we have the attributes. In the setup other, okay, so we don't have that. I don't know whether we can debug that or not. So I'll just go ahead and try to open this up again. I'll just close it and try to open that up. And let's navigate to the Vue DevTools. Let's open up our index. And okay, we have the students URL, which is undefined and is a computed value. But why is it undefined initially? So this is a computed value and we have a URL. Okay, we need to return the URL, otherwise it won't work. So let's save that. Okay, this is a type of URL as you can see, but if I go ahead and type something in here, okay, the search value has been reflected, but this is not showing that change, probably because this is a type of URL. So what we can do here is we can watch for the student's URL, and whenever that changes, we can make a visit to that specific URL, and that is gonna basically visit that URL. So let's go ahead and do that. So here, let's introduce watch, and let's pass a callback, and we want to watch for the student's URL. So let's pass that. And since this is a computed property, we need to pass the value as well. And the second argument that we can pass over here is the new value that we get. So let's pass that, and whenever the value of the student's URL changes, we just want to go ahead and perform some operations in here. But first, let's try to debug this. I'll just go ahead and pass a console.log just to see that this thing is working. So let's go ahead and again open up the console, and we have some errors again. We need to import the watch from the Vue package. So let's do that, and let's reload it once. So let's say if I type something in here, then as you can see, whenever I type something, the URL is being built accordingly. And okay, let's try to look into the latest URL. Then as you can see, we have the href value as Inertia Vue Students Management.test. The route is students, the page is 1, and the search value is being set accordingly, and the value in this case is sum. So based on the value that we have typed over here, the URL is being built accordingly, and now the only thing remaining here is to programmatically visit this page, and this will set the URL in our browser accordingly, and then we can implement that on our backend. So yeah, that is a really simple task to implement it in our backend. The only tricky part is to implement this in our frontend. So yeah, let's now go ahead and visit this specific URL that we have over here, and we can easily do that using router.visit. So let's visit this new value, and instead of new value, I think we can name this as new students URL or updated students URL. Okay, I think updated students URL sounds better. So let's go ahead and do that. And along with this, I also want to pass a few options. So let's go ahead and do that. So I want to preserve the scrolling behavior, and I also want to preserve the state. So let's go ahead and pass that as well. Preserve state to true. And I think the router is not imported. So let's go ahead and import that from the Inertia.js Vue 3 package. And yeah, let's go ahead and give this a try. So I'll just reload, and we are currently on page 5. So let's navigate to page 1 and let's try to search some data. So I'll just pass some in here. Then as you can see, the URL is updated accordingly. So as soon as I type something, the URL takes that change and our inertia visits that route. So yeah, this thing is working. And there's one more issue in here. As you can see, as I try to navigate between the previous states, then as you can see, all the states are being navigated. So we can remove that behavior by passing the replace option. So let's go ahead and do that. And now this is going to replace the history, and yeah, that won't be tracked in the browser. So again, let's try to reload, and let's just open up the students page. And if I go ahead and type sum, and the previous state of this current state is the students route. So if I navigate to the previous state, then as you can see, all the search term is now reset and the replace state is applied, which is going to prevent keeping track of the history. So yeah, this thing is working, and the only thing remaining now is to implement this on our backend. So let's open up the students controller, and on our index, we are passing the students data. So the only thing remaining here is to filter the students data by the search term that we get in our index space. So let's go ahead and pass the request class in here, and we are passing the collection of all the students currently, but we want to filter that accordingly. So what we can do here is we can define a new student query, and you might have a case where you need to implement other queries as well. So what I will do is I'll go ahead and define a dedicated function for each method, and that way we can easily chain multiple filters. So let's define a new method over here. I'll name this as apply search. And if you have any other filters, then you can define more methods like these, and you can chain them on our controller. So since we only want our controller to access this method, so I'll go ahead and pass a protected access modifier, and we will be receiving the query in this case, and we will also receive the search term that the user types. So here we can just return the query, and we only want to search if the search input is present, and we can do that by passing when. So if this value is present, then we want to perform this query, and we need to pass some additional data to this. So yeah, if the search value is present, then we want to perform this query where the name is like this search query, and you can go ahead and search for multiple columns. And for this case, I'm just searching for the name column, and yeah, this should give you an idea about how we can perform search in our models. And now we can just go ahead and apply that query by calling this apply search, and we need to pass the student's query as the first parameter, and the second parameter in this case is the search term. And we can now go ahead and just paginate this student's query instead of grabbing all the data from the database. So let's go ahead and do that. So we have the student's query, and now we can call paginate on that record, and here this should now work. So let's go ahead and give this a try. I'll just go ahead and reload, and let's try to search by this Benedict name. So if I go ahead and type Bene, then as you can see, this is filtering the data by this name, and we are only searching for the name column in this case. And you can go ahead and implement multi-column searching, which is really easy now because we are defining dedicated methods for implementing different types of filters. And I think in Laravel version 11, we can call where all, I think, or yeah, based on your needs, you can go ahead and do that. I don't exactly remember the syntax, but if you want to search for multiple columns, we can chain or where. I'm sure this is going to work. So if you want to search for email, then you can pass or where with the value of the column like this search term, and yeah, this should work. So everything is working, and let's try to search by email. So we have an email of Melly16. So let's search for that. And as you can see, the email with this value is being returned. So this is working. And one last thing that I want to implement here is, let's say we have some values that is set already in our URL. And okay, let's try to search for data in here. And if I go ahead and let's say open or reload this page, then as you can see, the value is retained in the browser's address bar, but that is not retained in here. So yeah, I just want to go ahead and implement this, and we can easily fix this by passing the search value as a prop to our Vue component, and we can pass that as a default value to this search term, and that is going to populate that accordingly. So let's say we have some data in here initially, and if we go ahead and reload, then as you can see, this is being populated accordingly in here. So we just need to pass that value from our address bar to our Vue component, and we can do that by passing that as a prop. So here we can pass this search value by grabbing that from the request class, and if there's no value, then we can pass an empty string, and yeah, this should fix that. So we are passing this search by grabbing that from our request, and this is now passed as a prop, and we can receive that on our index component, and we want to pass that over here, and we can again use the use page to grab that value. So use page dot props dot search, and yeah, let's go ahead and pass that. Okay, we have some errors, so we need to import use page from the Inertia Vue 3 package. So let's go ahead and do that, and if we reload, then as you can see on the address bar, we have the search as sum, and that is being populated accordingly in here. So let's say if I pass something else, let's say I'll pass Melly, and that should be retained in here as well. And now even if you reload, then the search filter is applied accordingly. So yeah, we have finally implemented the search functionality, and along with that, I think we have also implemented paginations. So as you can see, we are currently searching for this M keyword, and we are getting around, okay, we have all the records being passed to us. As you can see, 100 results are being passed. But instead of that, let's try to search by something specific. So I'll try to search for doctor, and okay, we have 15 results. So if I navigate to the second page, then as you can see, the search is now lost. So yeah, we need a way to retain that, and we will be fixing this in the upcoming video. Okay, let's now go ahead and fix an issue where the search value is being lost whenever we navigate between these pages. So let's try to understand what's actually happening in here, and then we will go ahead and fix it. So let's open up our code editor, and here as you can see, I have the pagination component opened, and on our pagination component, we have these links defined, and whenever we click on any of the link, then we go ahead and execute this update page number method, and we are passing the link to that method. And on that method, as you can see, we are grabbing the page number, and we are manually visiting that page, which is the student's route, and we are passing that page. So obviously the state of the search input will be lost whenever we click on any of the pages. So yeah, we need a way to retain that search value, and we also need to make sure that the pagination is working properly. So let's try to understand how we will fix this, and then we will go ahead and fix it. So as you can see in here, we have this update page number defined on the pagination.vue, but we want to shift this into our index.vue, and that way we can keep track of the page number along with the search value, because we have these states defined on our index.vue. So what we will be doing here is we will be defining this and shifting this to our index.vue, and we will be passing that as a prop to this pagination component, and we will execute that when the user clicks on the button. So let's go ahead and do that. Actually, let's start working on this. So here we have the student's URL. We are watching for this, and let's define a new method somewhere in here. So I'll just define a new method called updated page number, and this will receive a link, and this is almost going to be similar to this method that we have defined over here with a few changes here and there. So this will receive the link. Let's now go ahead and define the body of this. And since we are now defining this on our index.vue, we can actually reference this page number that we defined in the previous video. And here, as you can see, we are referencing this page number on our student's URL computed property. And yeah, we can basically reference this over here as well. And whenever the search value or the page number changes, then the state is going to be reflected accordingly because we are on the same component. So yeah, let's go ahead and assign the page number dot value with whatever we have defined over here. So we just want to grab the first index of the link.url object, and we want to split it by the equal to sign to grab the page number, and we want to assign that to the page number that we have defined over here. So I'll just go ahead and pass that. And yeah, this is the implementation that we want to do over here. And here we will be receiving that as a prop. So let's go ahead and pass that first. So on our pagination, let's pass that function as a prop. So here we are passing the data, and along with that, let's also pass the updated page number. And if the prop and the key are same, we can basically do something like this. I don't exactly remember, but yeah, I think this is the syntax, or I don't exactly remember. So instead of passing it like this, I'll just pass the updated page number method. And again, to demonstrate this properly, what I will do is I'll just go ahead and comment this out for now, and I'll just log something in here. So let's log the link.url in here. And yeah, one more thing to note here is we are defining this on our index.vue, and we are passing that as a prop to our pagination.vue component. Okay, let's navigate to that, and let's now go ahead and receive that value on our pagination.vue, so we can get rid of this code and we can receive that updated page number, which is a type of function and is required. And whenever we click on the button that we have over here, which are basically links, we can pass that updated page number, and we will also pass the link to it. And here we have set up the index.vue accordingly. We have defined this method, and we are just logging whatever value gets passed from here. And yeah, let's go ahead and give this a try. So let's reload, and let's open up the inspector. Let's open up the console tab. And if I go ahead and click on 3, then as you can see, the link is being dumped in here. So we are basically defining the logic to grab the page number on our index component instead of the pagination component. And this will allow us to basically override this page number state that we have defined on our index.vue. And whenever we reassign this in here, then that state will be reflected on other areas accordingly, since we are on the same component. So yeah, let's go ahead and give this a try. So we have the page number.value where we are assigning this to whatever gets returned from here, and then we are computing the student's URL, and along with that we are also appending the page, which is this page number.value. And if we have the search.value present, then we are appending that as well. So yeah, let's go ahead and give this a try. So I'll just reload, and we are currently on page 2. So let's go ahead and search something. I'll type doctor, and as you can see, we have 15 results, and we are currently rendering 10 records. So if I go ahead and navigate to page 2, then as you can see, the search value is being retained in here, and we are now navigated to page 2. So yeah, this was something that I wanted to fix, because if we don't fix these small issues, then the user won't get a good user experience. So yeah, I hope that this was helpful, and you can now apply this for other improvements as well. If you have any other filters that you are applying, then you can use this approach to retain the state accordingly of your page. So yeah, that's it for this section, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Okay, so I noticed a small issue in our Datatable project, and I believe that we have fixed all the issues about pagination and search, but there's a small issue that we need to fix, and we'll be doing that in this video. But first, let's go ahead and look into the issue that we are currently facing, and then we will go ahead and fix it. Okay, so let's say if I'm on page 5, so I navigate to page 5, and then I decide to search for something. So let's say in this case, I'm going to search for a string called sum. And as you can see, we are currently on page 5. As you can see on the browser, it is indicating that we are on page 5, and then we are searching for sum. So it means that this record exists on our database, and we might have a limited number of records. And yeah, that's why it is not showing up in here, but you can see in here that it is showing 1 results. So yeah, something has been returned, but since we are on page 5, so that's the reason the record is not displayed here. But if I go to page 1, then as you can see, the record is now displayed. So yeah, that's the issue. Let's now go ahead and fix it. Okay, so let's open up our code editor, and here we can understand why is this happening, and then we can fix it accordingly. So here, as you can see, whenever the page number is updated, we just grab the page number and then assign it to our page number property. And again, we are watching for students URL, and whenever that changes, then we make a visit to this URL, and these all look good. But I think the issue is happening on this block of code. So we are checking if we have a valid search value, then we append search to our URL, and then we return that. So we now need a way to reset the page whenever the search value changes. So whenever the user searches for something, then we will just go ahead and reset the page number, and that would fix the issue that we are currently facing. So how do we do that? So if you go ahead and navigate to the bottom, then as you can see, we are watching for students URL, and whenever that changes, we make a visit to this URL, and along with that, we are also preserving the scroll, we are preserving the state, and we are passing replace to true. So whenever the search value changes, then we will just set the page number to 1, which basically means we are resetting the page. So yeah, let's go ahead and implement that. So what I will do is I'll just go ahead and copy this block of code, and instead of watching for students URL, we will watch for search, and we will get the updated value in here, and then we can check if we have a valid value. So we can pass that, and if we do, then we can reset the page number to 1, and we can do that by passing page number dot value equal to 1. Okay, so this should fix the issue, and we can verify that by looking into our Datatable project. So I'll just navigate to the students index page, and let's say if I'm on page 6, and then I type something in here. Okay, for some reason this is not working, so let's go ahead and look into it. So we are watching for search, and okay, we have search. Okay, I need to run the npm run dev command to compile the scripts, so let's go ahead and do that. And let's now go ahead and give this a try. So I'll just open up the students index page, and I'll navigate to page 5, and then I'll type sum, and we are still on page 5. Okay, so behind the scenes, I just hard refreshed the page, and that probably cleared the cache, and everything is now working as expected. So yeah, if I now go ahead and navigate to page 5, and then if I go ahead and type something in here, then as you can see, the page number is now reset and the results, as you can see, are now rendered. So yeah, everything is working as expected and the issue that we were facing is now fixed. So yeah, that's it for this video and I'll see you guys in the next one. Okay, so I wanted to add one more feature on our students data table, and that is to be able to filter the students by classes. So at the end of this lecture, we will be able to filter the students data by certain classes. So we can filter them by class 1, 2, 3. So based on the available classes, we will be able to filter them, and based on that, we can perform the search accordingly. So yeah, I just wanted to add this feature because I thought that this would be helpful to you. So yeah, let's go ahead and start working on this. So let's open up our editor, and the way we have structured our project, it's going to be relatively easy to add the filter by class functionality because everything is already set up. So we have these search and page numbers defined, and we are computing the student's URL based on these properties. So we just need to add one additional check in here, that is for the class ID, and based on that we can return the final URL, and then we are watching for that. So whenever that URL changes, we are making a visit to the student's URL. So yeah, everything is already set. We just need to add the class ID on this workflow. So yeah, let's go ahead and start working on this. So let's start by defining a new variable. So just like we have page number, let's define a new variable called class ID, which is initially gonna be an empty string. Okay, so once we have done that, what we can now do is we can check. So just like we are checking for search, we can again add a new check in here for class ID. So let's go ahead and do that. So if the class ID dot value is set, then we want to set the class ID on our search param with the class ID dot value. Okay, and whenever class ID changes, then we will make a visit to the student's URL route. So yeah, that is already done. We don't have to do anything about that. And again, we are also watching for search. So whenever we have a valid search input, then we reset the page number to 1. So that is also done. So we don't have to worry about that. And yeah, we can also watch for the class ID. So whenever that changes, we can reset the page number to 1. So yeah, that can also be done. And if you want to implement that, then you can just copy this implementation and apply that for class ID. But I'm not going to do that in this case because we have discussed that already. So yeah, we have added the check in here, and now we need to implement this on the backend. And we also need to define a select component on our front end where the user will be able to select the class, and based on that, we will be applying the filter. So yeah, let's go ahead and define the select component first. So let's navigate below, and here we have the button, and here we have the search input. So this is the input, and let's add the select component for class ID in here. And instead of typing everything from scratch, I'll just go ahead and paste it, and then we will continue working on that. Okay, so this is the HTML code for the select component, and here we have a default option applied for class 1, which is a static value, but later we will replace that with the dynamic content from the database. So yeah, for now, let's just go ahead and save this, and let's see how the design is going to look like on our front end. So let's open up our browser, and okay, we also need to run the npm run dev command. So I haven't done that. So let's go ahead and do that as well. And let's go ahead and reload. Okay, so we have the select drop down over here, as you can see. So let's go ahead and make a few changes so that we can render that somewhere in here along with the search component. And we can keep that over in here as well, but the user won't be able to notice this because it is located over here. So yeah, for that reason, I'm going to shift it along with the search component. Okay, so we have this class applied called justify between. So instead of that, we can pass justify start. And now as you can see, the class is placed along with the search component. And now the user can easily notice this component. So yeah, let's go ahead and populate this by sending the data from the backend. Okay, so on our student controller, we need to pass the classes data, and we need to do that on the index page because this is the index page. So what we can do here is we can basically copy the code from the create method because we are sending the data on the create page as well. And we can basically pass that over here, and then let's pass the classes data. Okay, and on our index.view, we can receive that. So on the define props, let's go ahead and copy this block of code and pass classes over here. So the type is going to be object and is required. So yeah, we can pass that. And now we can loop over the classes data and render the select component. Okay, so let's loop over classes, and we can't really name this as class because it is a reserved word. So I'm going to name this as item in classes dot data. Okay, and now we can display the name. So let's go ahead and pass that. And while we are here, let's also go ahead and pass the key, which in this case is going to be item dot id, and this has to be interpreted properly. So I'm going to pass the colon. Okay, and we also need to pass the value to this because we need to bind this accordingly. So the value in this case is going to be item dot id, and we also need to interpret this. So I'm going to pass the colon. Okay, let's save that, and we have some errors. So what happened? Okay, let's reload, and everything seems to work fine. Let's open up the inspector and let's open up the console. Okay, we don't have any errors. And if I go ahead and click on this select dropdown, then as you can see, all the classes that are defined on our database are rendered. Okay, and now we need to apply the filter accordingly. So whenever the user selects any of these class, we need to perform the query on our backend and return that data accordingly. And this is kind of similar to the previous implementation where we implemented the search functionality. So yeah, if you're getting an idea about how you can implement this, then yeah, make sure to apply your knowledge and implement this. You can just pause the video and try to implement this yourself. And once you do, then you can follow along. And based on that, you can implement the differences accordingly. Okay, so let's go ahead and continue working on this. So when the user selects any of these values, then we need to apply that query accordingly. So let's quickly go ahead and model this accordingly. So here we can pass v model, and we want to model this with class ID. Okay, and we have applied the changes accordingly for class ID. So we have defined a class ID, and whenever class ID changes, we are applying the search firam accordingly. And then based on that, we can filter the data on our backend. But first, let's go ahead and implement this. Let's see whether the current implementation is working or not. So if I go ahead and select a class, so as you can see, we have the default URL on our browser, that is /students. But as soon as I go ahead and select class 1, then as you can see, the class ID parameter is applied and the value is 1. And if I go ahead and select class 7, then as you can see, that is updated accordingly. So yeah, that is working. And if I go ahead and navigate to page 6, then as you can see, the class ID 7 and page 6 is applied accordingly. So yeah, everything is working as expected. So the only thing remaining now is to apply this on the backend. So yeah, let's go ahead and do that. So on our student controller, what we have done here is we have applied the query by defining a function called apply search. But what we can also do here is we can implement this in a scope. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's open up our student controller, and here we can apply a new scope. So public function scope search. So let's pass that. And here, the first argument that this will receive is going to be the query. So let's go ahead and pass that, and let's pass the second argument as the request because we have to pass multiple values in here. So whenever we pass the request object, so everything will be passed along accordingly. And let's also go ahead and import these classes. So let's import this from the Illuminate database eloquent builder. And this is going to be Illuminate HTTP request. Okay.
And here we can apply the search and the filtering by class accordingly. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and copy this block of code and I'll get rid of this because this is not necessary now. And here, instead of applying the search, we can basically pass the search over in here. So student search, and we also need to pass the request along with this. So let's go ahead and pass the request. Okay, and we have the student's query now, and then we are grabbing the records from the database by performing the pagination. Okay, let's go ahead and give this a try. I'll just save the student model. Okay, we need to apply the query over in here. So we want to check if we have a request search, then in that case, we need to perform this, but we don't have this search variable defined. So we need to bring our request into scope in here by passing a request. Okay, and now we can access the request over here. So let's go ahead and pass the request search. Okay, and let's go ahead and give this a try. So I'll just go ahead and reload it once and let's search for AL, let's say. Okay, seems to work. And we also have some, so yeah, that seems to work fine. Okay, let's now go ahead and implement the filter by class functionality on the backend. So we have the request object already. So we can easily access the class ID by grabbing request class ID. And since we are sending that data on our query parameter, so we will have access to it with our request object. And we can verify that by dumping request class ID. Okay, let's dump that. And if I go ahead and reload, then okay, so the class ID is not applied currently, as you can see, but as soon as I go ahead and select any class, then as you can see, the class ID is being dumped in here. So yeah, everything is working as expected. And now on our student.php, we can apply when we have the request class ID. And this is not going to work just yet because we'll have an issue when we try to apply this, but let's go ahead and look into it. Let's try to understand why this is not going to work, and then we will go ahead and fix it. Okay, let's pass the query, and now we can apply the query where the class ID is request class ID. Okay, and we also need to bring up our request object into scope by passing use request. Okay, and let's go ahead and give this a try. So I'll just reload and let's try to remove the search term. And now whenever I select class 1, then as you can see, the class 1 filter is applied and only the students belonging to class 1 are displayed over here. But let's say I'll try to filter this by class 2 and I'll search for JAM. So let's try to search for JAM. Then as you can see, okay, the class ID is 2 in here, but let's say if I select class 1, then as you can see, I've applied the filter for class 1 and I'm searching for JAM, but the result in here, as you can see, is returning a student that belongs to class 2. So yeah, this is the issue that I was talking about, and this is not the behavior that we want. So let's now go ahead and fix this issue. So what do you think is actually happening over here? So on our query, as you can see, we are checking if we have request search, and we are also checking if the request class ID is available. And in that case, we are applying the class ID filter accordingly. And these are correct. I mean, both of these are technically correct, but what's actually happening here is both of these are applied independently. So what we want to do here is we want to combine both of these so that whenever we search for any of the values, then based on the filter that is applied for a certain class, then only for that specific class, the results would be returned. So currently, both of these are executed independently, but we need to apply both of these filters together so that this search result that we are searching over here applies to the class that is currently selected. So yeah, let's go ahead and fix this issue accordingly. So what we can do here is I'll just get rid of this whole block of code, and then we can pass another condition called where, and here we can pass a function. So let's go ahead and pass the query to it, and then inside that we can now apply a combined query, and this will be applied together because we are passing this inside a closure. So here we can pass return query, and then we can pass the condition that we want to apply. So here we want to check if the search is valid, then in that case we want to apply this condition, and if we have a valid class ID, then we want to apply this filter. Okay, so since we are passing this inside a closure, so both of these are going to be applied together. And we also need to bring up the request into scope by passing use request. Okay, and now if I go ahead and reload, okay, and I'll search for GAM. So as you can see, only one result is returned, and this student belongs to class 2. But let's say if I go ahead and filter this by class 1, okay, seems like this isn't working as expected. As you can see, I'm searching for this keyword called GAR, and I'm applying the filter by class to only load the students belonging to class 1. And as you can see, the students belonging to class 5 are also loaded. And for some reason, this isn't working. So what do you think is happening under the hood? Can you figure out the issue? So if we go ahead and look into our code editor, let's open up the scope that we are applying over here. So what we are doing here is we are passing the condition inside this where function, and inside that we are checking if we have a request search value, and in that case we are searching for name and email, and again we are also checking if we have a class ID, and in that case we are performing the filter by class ID. But the issue that we are currently addressing is also happening in here because this is applied independently. So we now need to apply the same strategy that we did over in here for this specific block of code. So yeah, let's go ahead and do it. So I'll just go ahead and copy this whole block of code, or maybe we can remove it, and then I'll again apply the where function, and then inside that we will again pass the query, and then we can also bring up the request object into scope. Okay, and I'll go ahead and paste the code that I just copied, and now we can apply the query. Okay, and let's go ahead and give this a try. So what we basically did was we applied a global condition where we are checking if we have a request search input, and if we do, then we are combining this query by checking for name and email, and again we are also checking if we have a class ID, and if we do, then we are applying the class filter. So yeah, let's save this, and if I go ahead and give this a refresh, then as you can see, only the students belonging to class 1 and which have the key called GAR on their name or email are now returned. And if I go ahead and remove the class filter, then as you can see, the students belonging to class 1 and class 5 are now returned. And again, if I go ahead and filter this by class 5, then as you can see, only the students belonging to class 5 are returned. And if I go ahead and remove all the search term and only filter by a certain class, then as you can see, only the students belonging to a certain class are now returned. So yeah, everything is working as expected. And the only thing remaining now is if I go ahead and reload at this point, then as you can see, the class is not retained in here. So how do we fix this? So what we can do here is from our backend, we can send the value that is on our request class ID to the front end, and based on that we can apply that accordingly as the initial value. So just like we did for the search term, I think we did that. So let's go ahead and verify that. So on our search term, as you can see, we are setting the initial value by grabbing that from the props.search. So we are sending this data from the backend, and based on that we are setting the initial value to this search value. And if I go ahead and type something, and then if I reload, then as you can see, we are sending this data with the help of our request object to the front end, and we are receiving that as a prop
And based on that, we are setting the initial value accordingly. So yeah, we can basically apply that concept to select the class ID. So yeah, let's go ahead and do that. So here what we can do is, okay, we need to send that data from the backend first. So here we can send the class ID by grabbing it from the request class ID, and then we can receive that over in here. So use page.props.class ID, and if we don't have a valid value, then we will apply an empty string. Okay, and if I go ahead and reload, okay, we don't have any valid class applied right now, but if I go ahead and select class 1, and now if I reload, then as you can see, the class 1 value is automatically applied over here. Okay, so that's it for this video, and as you can see, we applied the filter by class functionality, and I hope that you learned some new stuff along the way. And let's quickly go ahead and remove a few stuff from here. So I'll get rid of these stuff, and okay, everything seems good. So yeah, that's it for this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.